How's it going?
Pretty good.
Thanks for making it out early this morning. You guys are repping each other's projects, huh?
I mean, we had to be here. I'm happy these guys are here.
Yeah.
True.
It's pretty early. Yeah, we got the swag on. So Sonny's got the Polkadot t-shirt. I got the Cosmos t-shirt on.
Nice.
Nice. All in the spirit of cooperation.
I like it. So, I was just referencing, maximalism in the context of Bitcoin, right? Which has been around for quite a while. But I think in the past year or so, maximalism in the context of Ethereum has kind of become a thing, particularly as these kind of next-gen dApp platforms like Polkadot and Cosmos have emerged. So I'm curious how you guys think about Ethereum and Ethereum maximalism in the context of kind of the projects that you're building.
Yeah, so Ethereum is fundamentally a smart contract platform, and they have this history of basically every project which ever wanted to build a dApp in the past 3 or 4 years was going on Ethereum because that was more or less the best option. But now we have the situation where you have viable competitors coming to light where somebody else might find a dApp is more useful on another platform. And I don't think that all use cases are going to map off of Ethereum or onto other platforms. Ethereum is still really good for what I would call interoperability. Sort of this is the main aspect of smart contracts, is the fact that you can have synchronous communication, that you can immediately call another smart contract and get a return value, and that itself is very useful for solving sort of coordination problems. But I think fundamentally it's just a community adjustment, and I think it was one that should not have really come to a surprise as a surprise to the community, because I don't think that anybody really should have ever thought that, okay, where Ethereum is as of 2015 or 2016 with the Frontier mainnet, it hasn't evolved that much since then, at least on 1.x, was ever going to be the end of where blockchain research goes. And a lot of the maximalism is just sort of a response by people who didn't really consider what's going to be researched beyond that, and thought, okay, this is just a thing I've invested in, and I'm going to be super bullish on this, and anything else that purports to have advanced the state of the art is a pretender. And this is basically the sum of Ethereum maximalism. Yeah,
I mean, when it comes to the Ethereum blockchain, I think what Rob said was basically pretty much on point. And I think when it comes to the Ethereum token, I think that Ether is kind of going into this narrative shift where for a long time it's been trying to be this gas token or fuel for Ethereum. And now it's kind of trying to become more of a money, which inherently comes with some level of necessary maximalism. If you want to try to make money, you need to basically go out and say, oh, this is money. And if that's maximalism, I don't know. It just seems that people are just pushing a certain token to be widely adopted.
Got it. So I have a working thesis here, and I'm curious, what you guys think. From my perspective, I think Ethereum is working really well for kind of open global financial applications, right? And we're talking about DeFi later. So for the types of applications that require kind of high dollar value, low throughput, and don't necessarily need instant finality, I think Ethereum is working quite well. And scalability in Ethereum is a known issue, but dApps like MakerDAO and many others are working pretty well with existing scalability. So kind of the way I see it is that there is a clear kind of product market fit for Ethereum, and what I'm excited about platforms like the ones you guys are building, the reason is because I think just like Bitcoin was solving a problem, and then Ethereum came along and enabled new use cases. I think we could see something similar here with Cosmos and Polkadot, particularly for the types of decentralized applications that require low dollar value, high throughput, and instant finality. So things like social applications and gaming. So I'm curious, do you guys agree, disagree, and to what extent are you seeing, well, in the case of Sunny, now with Cosmos kind of live, and in case of Robert, the types of conversations you're having, what types of use cases are you most excited about kind of enabling?
So yeah, I mean, I do agree that I think we see a lot of we will start to see a lot of applications that maybe don't necessarily will fit on Ethereum. I can give an example. There's a project called Lino who's working on a Cosmos chain. They have micropayments for video for Twitch streaming, and so that's kind of something that I don't think that kind of level of micropayment system would work on Ethereum because of just the throughput. But I kind of disagree that low volume applications and current DeFi platforms can actually work on the current state of Ethereum. So for example, I've tried launching an Augur prediction market, and it takes about half of the gas limit of an entire block. And I just don't think that's a reasonable, scalable thing. And even if we're talking about DeFi in general, I'm not that. I think Ethereum did a lot of things really well, but one of the few things I don't like is a lot of the designs around the EVM. And so I think that there's a lot more interesting and better VM designs that you can do if you want to create a system that's focused on secure DeFi. And so the one I'm really looking forward to is the Agoric VM, which is this JavaScript object capabilities based system. So I think there's a lot more room for exploration when it comes to building DeFi systems.
So the original question was a bit about instant finality and whether that actually has a bearing on what kind of applications are actually useful. This is something that I generally don't really agree with. I haven't been yet convinced that instant finality is actually really either instant or inherently useful. I mean, in the end, what instant finality really means is single block finality, but it actually means that you've gone around and you've collected all the 2/3 quorums that you need in order to finalize the block before ever releasing it, which means that you're maximalizing 100% for time to finality, and you're completely minimizing time to first inclusion or first confirmation. So what we've been doing is more looking at hybrid consensus protocols where you have still very fast finality within a couple of seconds, but the first inclusion is even a little bit faster than that. So you can already know sort of which chains you would pick and choose to follow the chain that contains your transaction, that you can already start to optimistically build upon that. And that's a little bit of an edge, at least on the consensus layer. But at least I wouldn't say that the consensus mechanism, the means by which you're actually assigning security to transactions, is actually the most important factor on which kinds of applications are possible or particularly well suited to a platform. On that, I would agree a bit more with Sunny that it's a lot more about what's your virtual machine, what's your execution model. Sort of our thesis at Polkadot is that the way that smart contracts function is that you have very, very, very granular operations. So you add a number, you charge a gas fee. You multiply that with another number, you charge a gas fee. And you're doing these super low level operations like CPU instructions, something like that. And every single time you levy a gas fee. And this is pretty inefficient. So the idea is, if you can specialize and you can say, okay, my transactions for this chain correspond to doing much more work, then you can levy a fee once and do all of that work. And the idea of specialization within the execution environment is probably going to lend itself to a lot more kind of complex and efficient applications. And I think we really see this downside of gas with typical smart contract platforms, with the fact that it takes millions of gas to do anything particularly useful on Ethereum right now. A lot of the fancy cryptography stuff, you have to use special built-ins that require hard forks just in order to get the gas costs down to a reasonable level in order to actually, run those kinds of transactions. I mean, none of the zero-knowledge stuff you see on Ethereum right now would be possible without those built-ins. So yeah, it really comes down to the virtual machine, I think, a bit more than the consensus layer.
Do you agree with that, Sonny?
I mean, obviously, I would like to push back on the lack of need for fast instant finality or one-block finality. I mean, in Cosmos, you can support many different consensus protocols, but really the one that's been gaining the most wide adoption right now is Tendermint. And I think people, especially when it comes to interchain communication, if it's taking a couple seconds already to make a transaction on one chain, if you're trying to go between multiple chains, you want that finality to come as fast as possible so that interchain communication can happen much more quickly.
I mean, only if you don't pool security. If you pool security, you don't have to wait for finality to bridge transactions.
But then if something breaks down, then you have to revert many, many chains and your entire system. if you don't wait for finality to send information from one parachain to another, and then one parachain gets corrupted, you could potentially like corrupt the entire Polkadot system.
Yeah, and there's a slashing cost associated with that.
Sure.
We're going a little in the weeds here. I want to kind of keep, stay away from that a bit, but it's a good discussion. So I think I want to touch on something kind of you referenced, which, pushing back on, my claim that DeFi is working well, or working as good as it could be, right? Because I do think it's working well, but I do also think there are, huge opportunities in the DeFi space, right? One specifically is decentralized exchange, right? Decentralized exchange is kind of a category that I think there's been a lot of interest and excitement for, the past 3 or 4 years right now, and a lot of experimentation as well with projects, like 0x and Relayers built on 0x, and decentralized exchange is still, tiny on a relative basis to kind of the volumes that we see on centralized exchanges, right? So, it's unclear why exactly that is, but it could be that, a new platform like, one of the ones that you guys are building kind of enables DEXs to really work at scale. I'm curious how you see that. I maybe start with Sunny, just because you guys have launched and you are seeing a lot of I think interest from kind of outside parties and even some centralized exchanges that are excited about kind of using the Cosmos SDK for DEXs.
Yeah, sure. So a few weeks, I think 2 weeks ago, someone wrote an article, a really great article, just kind of talking about how Cosmos Hub is this like, you can think of it as these trading routes between these like different like nations, and like these trading routes that like can allow assets and stuff to move along them. And they kind of hid something in the last few sentences of the article, which is like something about like, when there's a lot of trading routes, oftentimes on the side of there's like those busiest trading routes, a little marketplace will start to show up. And so, yeah, I think like, DEXs are totally like very important to the Cosmos ecosystem. A lot of people have been asking us to put a Uniswap module on the Cosmos Hub because, if tokens are quickly moving through the Cosmos Hub, they might as well quickly, like, you could use Uniswap for a quick swapping of these tokens. And then when you're trying to build much more advanced layer, like DEXs, like Uniswap's great for like quick swaps, but if you're trying to build like real DEXs with like order books and like for more higher volume trading, then you're going to want to, like, we see a number of people adopting the Cosmos SDK. Binance is probably the most well-known one, but there's a number of other large exchanges who have also started kind of using the Cosmos SDK and experimenting with it. And so it'll be really interesting to see all the DEXs. What I'm personally most excited about is I want to see what kind of interoperability you can get on DEXs that you couldn't get in centralized exchanges. Something I'm particularly really interested in is this idea of how can you share liquidity amongst DEXs, but in an incentive-compatible way. So that's some of the research I've been working on for the past couple months.
Yeah, with DEXs in particular, I think that there's sort of an interesting point to be made about what happens when we go from one chain to many chains. I mean, what people have been thinking about historically when they want to build a dApp is like, okay, I'm just going to deploy a smart contract, or maybe I'll build my own chain for that. But as we move into the world of interoperable chains, you're going to have to think about things, dApps that bridge across many chains. They each have components that live on many different chains. I think DEXs are a particularly illustrative example of this. Because typically you would think, okay, we'll just deploy a DEX chain and we'll have a chain that everybody uses for DEX. But one option is actually you have a component of a DEX that lives on every chain. So one of the main problems that you would have, for example, if you try to do a DEX on one chain, is that everybody transfers relatively little amounts to this chain. You have a lot of traffic through the interchain message passing protocols for relatively small transfers that lead to relatively small exchanges that lead to relatively small messages back to some other chain. So this is obviously a lot of clutter in the interchain messaging. So if you have a component rather that lives on every or a set of many chains, then you can do quick trades without ever having to wait for the latency of passing a message to a DEX chain and going back. And then in the background, you have market makers that are moving huge amounts of volume between all the components of this DEX that live on many different chains. And this was an idea, I think, first put forward to me by the team from 0x, but I think it's a really interesting way, that we can already see that dApp teams are already adapting to how the multi-chain world is going to revolutionize the stuff that they've already been thinking about for years.
Got it. So there's so much to talk about here, and unfortunately we've only got 5 minutes left, but I want to give you guys a chance to kind of talk about just the general state of kind of your projects and kind of roadmap for the next 6 or 12 months. So maybe Sunny, first start with you. I mean, to me, Cosmos is one of, if not the most kind of important launch in the whole ecosystem that we've seen this year, right? And you guys launched about 2 months ago. So maybe talk about that launch, kind of how it's gone, and also, the fact that the launch is really just the start, right? And there's a whole roadmap of kind of things that you're adding on to kind of the core infrastructure.
Sure. So Cosmos, is, what it really is it was this vision of many different application-specific blockchains all interoperating with each other to create a much more scalable and cohesive, both technically and socially, blockchain ecosystem. And so for that, we identified a couple of things that needed to exist in order for that to work. The first one was a blockchain BFT consensus protocol, and so that's kind of where Tendermint came along about 4 years ago, where it was the first Tendermint blockchain-based BFT protocol really designed for use in blockchains. And then the other one was a framework for making it easy to write blockchain applications in an easy-to-use language like Golang. That's what became the Cosmos SDK. And the third was a interoperability platform, a sidechain protocol, so you can actually move data and assets between chains, and that's what IBC is. So really, what we launched 2 months ago with the Cosmos Hub, right now it was really meant to test the first two. So Tendermint consensus with proof of stake, and the Cosmos SDK. So this is really the first public blockchain that uses, in my opinion, a solid proof of stake system with a real BFT consensus protocol. And so we've basically been testing that and testing the staking economics and governance and whatnot on that system. And we're currently in development of the IBC system. And so there's our team in Berlin is heavily focused on working on this IBC, making sure it's compatible across many different frameworks. So the goal is that I should be able to write a chain in the Cosmos SDK, but also, on the EVM or in Lotion.js or even Substrate, and they should all be able to interoperate using the IBC protocol. Meanwhile, I'm kind of really more focused right now on the post-IBC world. So, IBC should be coming in about 3 to 6 months. What do we do? What's the next steps after IBC? And so for that, I'm starting to look into things around shared security, where chains maybe don't want to come up with their own validator set. How can they basically go to the Cosmos Hub and basically say, can you validate our chain in exchange for rewards and stuff? So these are some of the things I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about some ideas of how you can make it so you can keep your assets, monetary assets on the Cosmos Hub, but still be able to pay transaction fees on a variety of chains. So me and Zaki Manian, we're kind of really focused on researching some post-IBC world stuff.
Yeah. So we started the Polkadot project a couple of years ago, and we laid out a roadmap, which was essentially 2 years of research and development. We're about 1.5 years in, and we're pretty much on target. The initial release is still slated for later this year, so that's when you can start to expect stuff. There should be value-bearing testnets and such in the meantime. Basically, one of the things that we did was, we want a system where a lot of teams are building their own blockchains, and Polkadot is sort of one half of that. I think a pretty apt metaphor is the computer and the networking card. So you have the computer, which is something that actually does computation, and then you have the networking card, which lets it talk to other computers. So if you adapt that to blockchain, Polkadot is the networking card. We have a product called Substrate from Parity Technologies, which is the computer. It lets you build blockchains very easily. And basically, Substrate is being rolled out. Substrate 1.0 is stable release is being rolled out right now. And the idea is that to build on Substrate, you don't rely on Polkadot, right? They're very complementary, but they are not intrinsically tied together. So as a team, you could build and deploy a mainnet of your project on Substrate without ever plugging into Polkadot, or you can make future plans to later on upgrade the consensus engine of the chain mid-flight and turn it into a Polkadot parachain a bit later. So basically what we've got so far is we've got a bunch of testnet. We've actually had testnets sort of running for, I guess, years at this point. But we've got a couple more milestones. We're going to put up a value-bearing testnet or two probably in the summer, and then we're going to ramp up for the initial release. That's not the end of things. One of the things we want to explore for Polkadot 2.0 is the idea of hierarchicality. So the model of Polkadot is that you have a relay chain with parachains connected to it. But what if those parachains could also be relay chains? And this is sort of the question that we will try to answer with Polkadot 2.0.